All right. Hmm. Uh, Deborah, I think I'm gonna make you the admin. Uh, Deborah, you ready? Are you good to go?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. I'm making you the host here. Uh-oh.
Okay.
What did I do? Ah,
It
see that?
says, it says you made me the host, right?
I did make
Oh,
you
yeah.
the host. Can you still see my screen or do you just see my face?
I still see your face.
You see my face. Okay, maybe you have to transfer that back to me because I can't share for some reason. Or can you give me permission to share?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let me see. Mm.
Good afternoon, guys. So good to see you all joining in. We are going to start in about 12 seconds. I am super grateful. I have Deborah on the line with me, and she has so graciously offered to support me with some admin duties. So we're just sorting that through, making sure that you can see my screen and you can see what you need to see while we get this conversation going. But super excited today. It's going to be a good one. And then I do have some news to share with us in the relationships community. So super excited about that as well. Let me do this.
So, Jen, I have to actually make you the host because if I don't, you won't be able to share.
Okay. Okay. Make me the host. We'll work it out. We'll figure it out as we go. And I'll try to admit some folks as they come in. And of course, keep an eye on the chat. So am I the host? Yes, I am. All right, guys, I'm going to share really quickly. So you guys let me know if you can see what you need to see. And if you guys can hear me okay. Yeah, is that working? Thumbs up. Give me a thumbs up or a holler. Let me know that you guys can see what you need to see and hear what you need to hear.
We can see your screen now.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right, guys. Well, welcome to the relationship series. We are in season number 4. And of course, excited as usual to talk about all things relationships, all things that impact and affect our relationships. And today we are going to be talking about addiction. Addiction is actually a very normal phenomenon. Normal meaning that it is very common. It happens or exists or is experienced in more than half of our families, which means in more than half of our relationships. So more than half of our marriages, more than half of our sibling relationships, more than half of our parent relationships, more than half of our families of origin. And so it is a normal phenomenon, but it is a quite difficult phenomenon to navigate. And so we wanted to talk about the realities of addiction and how it impacts and affects our families, and how it impacts and affects us and our relationships and our ability to create and build quality relationships. So welcome. So glad you guys are here. I am Genevieve. I am your host. I am a speaker. I am a coach. I am a registered psychotherapist by trade. I love travel and I love to eat fried plantain. I'll throw out a little tip every week. And you guys can let me know who's in the room today. If you guys want to throw out a quick tip about yourself, a quick interesting fact, I would love to hear from you and love to know you. I am, again, interruptible. Please, please, please feel free, welcomed, and invited to sharing in the chat, sharing by turning on your microphone and speaking, asking a question, sharing a story. And then you could also raise your hand. I know some people are super, super gracious and love to do that. And I love that as well. So I am super open to that. I also love fried plantain. Yes, my girl. Fried plantain is it's so good. It's like anyway, if I had an addiction, it might be fried plantain, but I don't have any addictions. Okay. So again, here we have transformational conversations that help us to revolutionize our relationships. I like to be very clear about my position. I am not an expert. I am a passionate person. So I'm a person who is passionate about relationships. I love reading relationship books, listening to relationship podcasts, listening to audiobooks. I love being in courses and classes and conversations about relationships. I really do believe that we were born for relationships, and that connection and attachment is part of the essence of what brings us fulfillment and purpose and meaning in life. And so that's why I do this, have these conversations, and really make a valiant effort to ensure that we have tools and strategies and spaces where we can talk about making our lives better by making our relationships more enriching, and more healthy or healthier, and easier to do well, right? Because if we know and we have awareness and we have tools, then we can do the thing better. So that's why we're here, and I am super glad you are here. Thank you for being here. And let's jump right in. All right, let's see. Our agenda for today, it is the same agenda that we walk through. We're going to talk about why we're talking about this. We're going to go through some definitions. We're going to reflect, ask ourselves some questions, share. We're going to go through some quotes, look at some stats, look at the benefits and the steps that we can take to navigate this area well. And then, of course, we'll look at challenging ourselves to do something different, and then look at what's coming up next. And I do have a special announcement for us today, which should be really great. I think one of the things that really strikes me when we have these conversations is how much information there is out there that is unhelpful when it comes to doing relationships. And most of it does have to do with sorry, romantic relationships. And finding a partner, keeping a partner, getting married, and living happily ever after and whatnot. But I think what's important to note is that we require personal accountability, because nothing harms relationships more severely than like maladaptive mindsets, maladaptive behavior, in relationships, ways that we express ourselves, ways that we demonstrate care, ways that we get our needs met, whether it's through manipulation or through a protest behavior. Like these are our personal characteristics that we really need to get a hold of. We really need to get a handle on, right? Because they affect and impact the quality of our relationships. We cannot expect to act crazy in our relationships and then have great relationships. We just can't. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that, and to note that there are ways for sure for us to do what we do better. But there's like a what's the word? Maybe there's like an evaluation process. We have to examine ourselves. We have to evaluate ourselves, and then we have to make some decisions about how we're going to change. And this is part of doing the work. Here we do the work, we heal for real, and we sow what we want to grow. Okay, so this even just being a part of this conversation, being in this space, being in this room, is part of doing the work. It's part of gaining knowledge. It's part of gaining awareness. It's part of connecting with other people who also have like mindsets, who have desire to do their relationships well. And so that's part of why we do this and why we gather each week. When it comes to addictions in particular and how they impact relationships and why we're talking about it, the reality is we're dying. Like the truth of the matter is that families are breaking apart, are dissolving, marriages are dissolving. There are estranged relationships between mothers and sons and fathers and daughters, and so on and so forth, because of the existence of addiction within our families. And I put here, there's a lot of sadness and there's a lot of loss when it comes to addiction. And that can erode the sense of community, the sense of belonging, the sense of connection in a family unit. And it happens quick and fast, right? When you see somebody in your family, a loved one who is struggling, like, yes, they are struggling and their sadness is evident, but your sadness is also evident. And so we want to really, I really want us to take a systemic approach to addiction. It's not just an individual, but it's a family issue. It's a community issue. It affects loved ones. I've been through it. I haven't had an addiction per se, like my own, what I guess, they would label as an addiction in addiction circles. But I've walked through addiction with family members and loved ones, and on a professional level. So at a personal level, I've done that, and a professional level, I've also journeyed with individuals who have experienced addictions, who struggle with addiction. And in clinical terms, experience the disease of addiction. Um, so there's a lot of sadness attached. There's a lot of loss attached. And I'm talking like loss when it comes to, especially in families, we're talking about loss of like, the ability to like communicate, like sense of safety, sense of security. These are fundamental pillars for establishing and maintaining healthy relationship. If there's no trust, there's no communication, there's no sense of security, there's no sense of safety, there's no honesty, like there aren't healthy boundaries, there's no like sense of like predictability. If we can't count on the people around us and we don't have a sense of safety, then how are we going to build those healthy and deep and intimate connections that help us to build and fulfill life? And so sadness and loss
I'm
are,
looking for something just this. Uh,
who's chatting with me?
yeah, something like this. It's cracked up top. I don't know if you sell them individually.
Who's chatting with me? Oh, got it. Okay. I think I'm going to mute. Thank you so much. I think you muted yourself actually before I did. So we're looking at the prevalence of sadness, right, as a reason why. And sadness and depression, if anybody has ever had situational depression or a depressive episode, that it's very difficult to function and do well in life when you are sad, when you have low mood, right? And so if an entire family is experiencing that, my goodness, how much more so would it be difficult to get out of that, to rise out of that? Right? So why are we talking about this? Sadness and loss are real. Shame is real. Shame thrives in secrecy and in families, especially those that are insular, and families that say things like, oh, we keep our dirty laundry, don't put your dirty laundry in the street, keep your dirty laundry in the house. Shame can fester and grow very, very, very quickly, especially when we're looking at the things that aren't present. What if you're experiencing addiction in the family? Maybe dad has an addiction and he lost his job. Like that can bring about shame, and you might not want to tell anybody about that. Right? And so shame is a really big, it's a really intense emotion. It's a very sticky emotion, and it's a very big reason why we need to have these kinds of conversations to normalize the reality of addiction in families, but also to almost dismantle the effects and impacts that shame has on us as individuals, as well as our family units. Silence is a big deal for those of us who come from a West African or West Indian Caribbean community. I think silence is a value, that has been shared and promoted within our families. And I think it's one that we need to take with a grain of salt. It is one that we do need to consider as situations come up. Because some things we don't need to be silent about. Let me be very, very clear. Some things you need to speak, you need to say out loud, you need to share, you need to tell somebody. It's not worth being silent about, right? Because it's going to keep you in bondage, and eventually it's going to harm you and the people that you love the most. So silence is a big deal. And then stress and trauma, there is nothing that, okay, I think it's 9 out of 10. It's a very high percentage. There is nothing that precedes or that contributes to the onset of addiction like stress or trauma. So extreme distress, continued or ongoing stress, and any kind of traumatic event can precipitate the onset of trauma, or can influence an individual to, end up in addiction, can influence an individual to end up in addiction, okay? So there's a strong correlation between trauma, experiences of trauma, and addiction. And so we'll talk about the nuances there when it comes to why addiction, how addiction sort of happens. But just know that when there's trauma, and trauma is, for those of us who don't know what trauma is like when there's a stimulus that is overwhelming, that creates a sense of like horror or terror or helplessness or powerlessness that we can't control, right? And so that would be considered trauma. There's big T trauma, there's little t trauma. You know, we kind of, and that doesn't mean that the trauma is little. It just means that big T trauma is what most people can consider trauma, things that are outside of our control. Little T traumas are usually things that are ongoing. So like sense of failure, sense of, loss, like, what could be considered little T trauma? Like if you fail a test or an exam, maybe you study for the bar exam and you're going to be a lawyer, and then you fail that exam, right? That could be a trauma because you were anticipating passing that exam and then moving into the next phase of your career. But internally, now you have this sort of break in your plan, and that can resonate within the self, especially depending on mindset, as trauma. Big T traumas are things like natural disasters, and what else would be considered big T traumas? Crime, criminal attacks on the body, violence, yeah, those kinds of things. Anyway, things that stir up like terror, helplessness, hopelessness, that really disrupt us psychologically, those would be considered traumas. And they usually require for us to respond, and a lot of us respond by trying to feel better very quickly, and that can lead to consistently seeking out the behavior or the thing that makes us feel better. Okay, so that's why we're talking about it. Let's look at some definitions. Addiction, what is it? Addiction is physical, mental dependence on a substance. It can also be enthusiastic devotion to a particular thing or activity. Compulsive, chronic. These are words that I want you to remember. Compulsive, chronic, right? The need, it is habit forming. Substance, behavior, activity, habit forming, okay? So we have to look at what addiction actually is, because lots of people drink alcohol, lots of people, might experiment with drugs. A lot of people engage in things like pornography or sexual behavior, things like that, but they wouldn't necessarily be classified as addicts, okay? So it has to be chronic, has to be compulsive. We're looking at physiological and psychological changes that happen, right? Addiction is very, very specific. And then, of course, we're strongly inclined to do and indulge in the behavior or the thing repeatedly, even to our detriment. I remember when I was a camp counselor. This was years ago. This was years ago. And it, as much as it's kind of funny, it's kind of not. Like, I was a camp counselor, and we were going like on an excursion, like a camp excursion, to the Toronto Zoo. Let me tell you, I really do believe that I was like, and there's like tiers and levels of addiction, but I was like low-key addicted to candy. I really do believe that. I remember when I packed for this trip, like packed my own bag, all I had in the bag was candy, like just sugar, like sugary items. Like like Bulk Barn was like my dealer. Like I would go to Bulk Barn and just like stock up on like sweets and candy. It was crazy. So we went on this trip, and I had sour keys, I had gummy worms, I had chocolate bark, I had all kinds of all kinds of candy. And I was like, Jen, how are you going to survive on candy? And I really did feel like I could not survive without candy. Like sour keys were like my thing. I was like, every day I have to have sour keys. And if anybody knew me back then, I always had a lollipop, like a lollipop it was like a blow pop, and it had gum in the middle. I always had a lollipop in my mouth. And I just remember thinking, Jen, this is not healthy. And I vowed to stop that summer. I quit eating candy that summer, I lost 18 pounds. Like sometimes we don't really realize how destructive our behavior is until we get awareness and then we make a decision to stop. And I think it's important to yeah, I think it's important to note that. I have a comment in the chat. Silence, I'm going to read it out loud, is common in addiction or depression situations because of the responses, especially in the Black community. Yes, absolutely. Our responses can certainly either encourage others to share more and to do something about what they're experiencing, or of course, yeah, definitely to lead them further or influence and encourage them further into addiction. The view of something is wrong with you or you are possessed typically stops at just be strong and do what you need to do. Yes, absolutely. Those are some myths about addiction. You just need to be strong. You just need to stop. And we'll talk about the brain and how it works in relation to that in a moment. There's generally no compassion or empathy for the sick person or any offering of support or help. Hence the afflicted suffer in silence. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And what cell phone addiction is a big thing now. Yes, absolutely. And when we're talking about addiction, we're looking across the board. I think when we look at substances, we look at, I don't know, what are some substances that we can be addicted to? I think alcohol, like nicotine, like cigarettes, tobacco. They have those vaping things now. What's another one? Caffeine. Caffeine is a big one. Sugar is probably like number one, America's weapon of mass destruction, as they call it. And just drugs. Drugs are certainly addictive agents, as substances. But when we look at like process or behavioral addictions, we can't ignore the things that we do daily in order to feel good, right? And so things like being on your cell phone, the scrolling act, the act of scrolling can be addictive. The act of numbing the brain with the input of stimuli. And so that's like when you're on screens, if you're watching TV, your mind is offline, but your emotions are engaged. So screens, any kind of like social media, what's it called? Like Netflix binging, things like that. Sex, yes, that's definitely one that we can look at. What else? Excess work can be one of them. Even attitudes can be addictive. Like I think at one point I was addicted to like I want to say pessimism, almost like negativity. It's kind of like criticism. Like everything that anybody says, I always had like but like very cynical. I think we can be addicted to behaviors, attitudes, and to responses as well. I think we all have individual drugs of choice, and sometimes we may not recognize them as destructive or harmful to our relationships or even to ourselves because they're normalized in our particular communities or social groups. And I remember I asked some loved ones, like, hey, what do you think I should work on? This is years back. And I do it ever so often, but I was like, hey, what do you think I should work on? And they were like, yeah, you're kind of dismissive and judgmental. And I was like, okay, got it. And I start working on, when I become dismissive, how I become, what it does for me, what's the payoff, when I'm judgmental, what it does for me, all the things. And today I'm much different, and I can see now and hear now when others, and when I am being judgmental or dismissive, but when others are being judgmental or dismissive, like I hear it more clearly now, and it's so normal. It's just like in regular everyday comments. We have these very strong opinions that we'd like to share, but we share them not for the point of getting others to get to know us, right? For the purpose of connection and relationship. We share it for the other person to absorb and change their minds about their own opinions, right? And so it can be very harmful to relationships, and we don't even notice sometimes because it's just so normal, within our communities. So addiction we can look at drugs of choice, behaviors, attitudes, mindsets, just ways of thinking. We're addicted to a certain way of thinking. It makes us feel good. And we indulge in it repeatedly. It's a habit, right? And sometimes we don't even realize how it's harming us. Let's look at this. Okay, I have a couple more definitions which I thought were really, really good. Did I miss a shopping? Yes, absolutely. shopping overspending is like and I'll show you in a second, but there's like the registration for I want to say it's over or Debtors Anonymous. So all these groups, there's like Debtors Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Love Addicts, Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. There's all these groups that support individuals who are experiencing addictive behavior in association with a particular substance, right? Or whatever, addiction. So overspending was like Overspending Anonymous had like almost the highest enrollment in the last how many ever years. People are like shopping online, and shopping online, it bypasses some of this like the logic centers in the brain. So you don't actually feel like you're spending money. And so people like spend. It's similar to gambling. Spend. And then you don't realize, hey, you spent like your rent for the month, you spent like your savings and so on. But you have all these things that in the moment give you that jolt, right? Give you that feeling, that high. And then it goes away, and then you have to get the high again. So you have to repeatedly behave the same way or spend, right? So yeah, there's always a reward. I think we need to remember in addiction, there's always repeated behavior. It's compulsive, it's chronic. There's always some kind of reward. And it changes the way your brain and your body works. Like there's a need for that spike in adrenaline. There's a need for that feel good, that high. And it's almost as though we normalize that feeling. Like that feeling is when we're normal, as opposed to the feeling that we have regular, our sort of baseline every day. And those spikes in feel good neurotransmitters or biochemicals are special. And we get them when we go out in nature, we go for a walk or a hike or whatever the case is. So we program our brains and our bodies to feel those things on demand. I like Claudia Black's definition. Claudia Black is the author of what is it called? Her book. Anyway, I have a thing of it at the end. I think it's called Unspoken Legacy. And she talks about the link between trauma and addiction. So a lot of people talk about trauma, a lot of people talk about addiction, but she's a researcher that linked the two and really sort of drew the lines of connection between the two of them. So her definition of addiction is a pathological, ooh, I love it, a pathological relationship. So there's something wrong, okay? A pathological relationship with one or more mood-altering chemicals either added to the body or released into the body due to engaging in a particular behavior. Okay, so mood-altering chemicals are already present in our bodies. Okay, we're talking about adrenaline that's present in our bodies. We're talking about serotonin. We're talking about dopamine. We're talking about endorphins. All of these things are present in our bodies. When we add drugs, there's a spike. Okay, there's an increase, there's a flooding of these things in our brain, and that's where we get the high, the feel good. We feel like we're like invincible, we can do anything. And then it also numbs out our fear centers, it numbs out our logic, it numbs out our depressive centers, right? And so we when people drink alcohol, they say they have lowered inhibitions, right? Things like that. So I want us to recognize that whether or not we add something like alcohol or drugs, or we experience a behavior or do something that causes those chemicals to spike, that there's a pathological relationship between us and those chemicals being released into our brain. I love her definition. It is so clear. And then the presence of these chemicals becomes central to the person's sense of normalcy and functioning. Okay, so now having those chemicals released and that feeling, that high, becomes a desire and becomes an indication, I should say, of normal. Like that is my norm. My norm is when I'm flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. I feel like I'm on top of the world. I'm in this this high, this zone, whatever. I love the ASAM definition as well. It's a primary chronic disease of brain reward. So reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Okay, so all of those are interconnected. It leads to biopsychosocial and spiritual dysfunction. So all the parts of ourselves are affected when it comes to addiction, addictive behavior, addictive thinking, adding substances, and so on. Okay. All right. So those are the definitions. I want us to think about it. And I know there's a group that, what is it called? My goodness, I can't remember the group name, but there's a group that it's like a self-help group, and self-evaluation, self-awareness. And what they do is they encourage individuals to balance their lives by recognizing when any of their behaviors or thought patterns are affecting them negatively. Okay, so if they're like a parent and they feel I don't know, they might feel powerless at their job, or they might feel as though they're not doing the job that they deserve to be doing, or that they studied to be doing. So they feel inadequate, let's say, but they go home and they might rage at their spouse or rage at their children, and they may not connect their spouse or their children's level of fear and their distance and disconnect. They might not connect their family's attitudes and behaviors to their own reaction or to their own behavior. And so it's sort of an encouragement to self-reflect. It's an encouragement to be introspective about how our presentations are really impacting other people. And so this is like emotional intelligence 101. Okay. How are you and your behaviors and your thoughts and your attitudes affecting and impacting the people around you? How is it contributing to the kinds of relationships that you can enjoy, that you can have, or that you do have? Like if all your relationships are a mess, and you don't have a sense of like, connection, intimacy, belonging, you don't feel loved, like those kinds of things. These are all question marks. These are question marks that we need to sort of turn towards. It's like, well, if we want to have better experiences with other people, I think there's a scripture, it says, he who has friends shows himself friendly, right? If we want to have better connections with other people, then is there something that we can do? Is there something that we're not doing in order for us to facilitate that or to make that more possible, right? So I want us to sort of self-reflect for the moment and think of your own personal like drugs of choice, right? Some of us work excessively. Some of us overeat, binge eating. Some of us are over exercisers. We're like, we need to exercise. We need to exercise because exercise floods us with those feel-good hormones as well, right? So when you think of your drug of choice, or when you think of behaviors or substances that you've abused in the past, if you think of, or can you think of your level of exposure to addiction in a friend, a family member, in your home, is it a real thing? Like, is it real? Is it reality to you? Have you experienced trauma? Do you know anybody that's experienced trauma? And I'll be, somewhat transparent here. Like I didn't have a framework or an understanding of addiction and how it impacts people so severely before I got married. Like I didn't know anything about addiction except for, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can go if you drink too much, or if you wake up drinking in the morning or something like that. So I didn't grow up with addiction. My dad, he drank beer, but he never seemed drunk, or ended up like abusing us, ended up in a rage or whatever. I mean, natural Nigerian man rages, but not not like alcoholic rages or anything like that. So I didn't have a framework for understanding this until I experienced it myself in my marriage. And that blew me away, like just understanding and coming to terms with, and Joanne, I'm right there with you when it comes to like, why don't you just like fix up yourself, like fix up your life, like get straight. Like, I don't understand. Like, if I can do it, why can't you do it? Kind of thing. Like, I was right there. I had no clues whatsoever how to understand the addictive brain. And to link, how to link trauma to addictive behavior. And so I certainly walked through like lack of empathy, confusion. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. I don't know what, like, I don't get it. I don't know what you're talking about. And that came across as cold, dismissive, like just, yeah, unsupportive, all the things in my marriage. And having a greater understanding now, I'm like, wow, like it's a lonely, scary place to be isolated in addiction, in the addictive cycle. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a heavy topic, but what has been your experience? What has been your experience with addiction? Have you guys ever been able to sort of offer support to friends, family members? Have you experienced it yourself? That kind of thing. Share with me. Share if you dare. um, in the chat. And maybe even, how you got out of it, or helped people out of it, or what you've done as a result. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Maybe I'll ask a question with regards to, especially when it comes to things that we use every day, like cell phones. Like, do you feel addicted to your cell phone? Do you feel like you're addicted to checking on those notifications? Every time your phone buzzes, you've got to check it. You got to make sure you know who's messaging, or who's hitting you up on social media, all the likes and all those things. Has that been a thing for you? Has that changed the way that you think, that you interact, that you engage, that you live? If you forget your cell phone at home, does do you turn around and get it even though you're late, or does that, ruin your day, kind of thing? Any thoughts? You guys are so quiet today.
Hey Jen, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I came on a bit late, so I apologize if this has been said, but definitely coming from a space of not necessarily cell phones or alcohol, but food.
Mm,
Food, and even seeing people who are completely addicted to food, and how it's hard. It's a hard conversation to have
yeah.
when you see someone falling apart,
Mm,
and even in it, watching someone like pour food in their mouth.
ooh,
And I recently just saw that, and I see the effects of it.
mhm,
And it's scary. It's scary because it's such a hard thing to tell someone about.
yeah,
So I'm not sure how to deal with it because it's someone I love dearly.
yeah,
But it's a place of depression, I think.
yeah,
And they're using the food to compensate.
yeah,
And even while, sorry, as my phone goes off, even while they're in it, it's really hard to watch. So experiencing that, and that person kind of knowing, but they just still keep going back to it. It's a hard thing. So just want to
yeah,
share.
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the hardest areas to identify when it comes to addiction are some of these normal, natural survival type of behaviors. Like, we need to eat to live, but we don't need to eat in excess. And we don't need to eat to the point where we are actually damaging ourselves. And it is hard to watch. It's hard to watch anybody destroy themselves, or harm themselves, especially people that we love. Um, but the question about the conversation, it's like, how do you have the conversation? How do you share what you're seeing or what you're noticing? How do you confront as opposed to enable, right? How do you become one who is sort of interdependent rather than codependent, right? It's hard. It's really difficult to decide what you're willing to risk, especially when addiction is not, it's not normal. It's not like a normal way of thinking. You're literally watching somebody destroy themselves, or kill themselves, or harm themselves, or hurt themselves and the people around them. And with your rational mind, you're thinking, like, don't you see the damage you're doing? Why don't you make different decisions? Well, they're not thinking. they're not thinking at all. Actually, studies show that when people are in addiction, there's like a black hole of the mind. Your prefrontal cortex is offline, like it's disengaged. You are not thinking straight. You're not logical or anything like that. So you're watching somebody who's behaving in line with what they need to feel in order for them to function and survive, or what they think they need to feel in order to function and survive. And it's challenging. It's challenging to hold, you know, your own personal feelings of despair and sadness and hopelessness, and sometimes a fear, sometimes fear of saying anything, because it might, you know, what, for fear of what your words or your commentary might do, what the effect it might have. But yeah, definitely thank you for sharing that. I think food and sex are two addictions that are so tricky. And there are still many studies out there. A sex addiction is not a real thing, clinically speaking. But I think the reality of what we feel when we experience sexual activity or when we eat, I think it qualifies, right? Because we feel good. And so we want to feel more of that good feeling kind of thing. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I see, what do I see here in the chat? I think it's
Yeah, I
definitely.
don't think I've ever really
Oh, go
looked
ahead.
at, like, you talked about addiction in the sense of like behavioral addiction, and I don't think I've ever looked at it that way. I don't think I recognized that, yeah, that the repetitive behavior is an addiction, right? Because I'm always thinking, okay, there's a root, there's something causing it, but it might just be that feeling of however they feel when they're negative, right?
Mhm.
And that might be, yeah, I've just never looked at it that way, and I'm just like grappling a bit, just considering other things that have happened, other people that I've seen, trying to place why that behavior is happening, but it could just be because the way that makes them feel when they act a certain way, right?
Yeah,
I don't think I really looked at it that way.
yeah. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's, you know, part of it is self-awareness as well. Because sometimes when you know, we say certain things when we're critical and judgmental. I'm a recovering addict. We feel empowered. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm better than, you know, I'm good. And we don't really realize we're nursing an insecurity, or we're nursing a feeling of inadequacy, right? But it's like, I feel good when I say these things or when I respond this way. And so I want to do it more. I want to repeatedly do this behavior so I can feel good. But then it becomes destructive after a time, right? And that's almost the deception of addiction, because at first it does feel good and there are very minimal consequences, right? But over time, gradually, we experience more consequences, and very destructive consequences, in fact. Let me see. Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Clayton, a survivor of addiction in recovery. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear from you if you want to share about your journey. Leafa says, I think it's definitely important to make time and space for self-reflection. Easy to hear this information, but real transformation comes when we're able to sit with ourselves and have honest introspection about our drugs of choice. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We got to take a look at ourselves and lean into your community as well. Like if you have loved ones, your loved ones will tell you. They will tell you if you want to know, right? I know addiction, one of the sort of pillars of addiction is that we're in denial. Denial is a really big part of staying in addiction, you know, silence and shame and all that stuff. But for those of us who can engage with our logic, like just ask, like, is there anything that I'm doing that, you know, is kind of crazy and that I need to check, right? Jojo, I've experienced depression in silence for many years. No one around me knew or saw the signs because I was a high-functioning depressed person. Yes, and there are high-functioning addicts as well. I learned to recognize the triggers and put measures in place to prevent getting into a depressed state. What I've realized is that everyone needs to identify their triggers and what works for them and not get to that place. Thank you so much for that, Joanne. Yes, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of us are talking about our own, you know, our own personal experiences and how we have coped, how we have moved forward, you know, out of the danger zone. Okay, let me push on ahead. Again, I'm interruptible, so if you want to share, you definitely can. I invite you to do so. Here's a quote: "Addiction is a family disease because one person uses, but the whole family gets sick." Okay. And I want us to recognize that even if we are experiencing something, that it's affecting the people that you love. That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, we don't experience things or do things in a silo. We're all connected. This is the whole point of having a relationship series, to recognize how interconnected we really are, and that our natural way of flourishing and thriving in life is with other people. It is connected to other people, not on our own and not isolated. And so that means if we're doing unhelpful things, that affects our relationships and our well-being as well. So these are some things that happen in families. So addiction is a family disease, is a framework that recognizes that families usually support and facilitate the continuation of the addiction. And these are some ways that families do that. So like, strong reactions from family members include like making excuses. Denial is a big one, just pretending that it's not happening. Minimizing is a big one, right? So I have some points here, and these are some things that come up in every conversation that I have about addiction with an addicted person, a person who's experiencing addiction. They say in their families, they've heard these things. There's a don't talk rule, so don't talk about it. People don't talk about it. We dodge responsibility, we lie, we blame others. We're able to live a double life because the family is covering. The family's covering and enabling, right? And the family's like, oh, it's not so bad, or they can go out and have a little drink every now and again, every night, because they deserve it, or they work so hard, or there's a sense of helplessness. Oh, there's nothing I can do. It's their life, it's their business, and things like that. When the addict is like acting out and crying out for help, right? And one of them is they can stop whenever they want to, which is also, interestingly enough, a lie of the addict. The addict will say, I can stop whenever I want to. I'm not actually an addict. Like this thing doesn't have control over me. I can stop whenever I want. And they keep telling themselves that story until things unravel to the point of realization. But a lot of the ways that families experience addiction is through this sort of denial, excuses, pretending, minimizing framework, and that enables the addict to continue. And it's actually very, very harmful. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show Intervention, but there was a show called Intervention back in the day, where families got to the point where they were fed up. They didn't want to pretend anymore, look the other way anymore, or the addict's behavior had gotten so destructive, like they might have been stealing. Maybe they took the family television and went and pawned it off so that they could get money to buy drugs, or whatever the case is. Like, it got to the point where the families couldn't deny anymore, couldn't pretend that things weren't as bad anymore, and so then they staged an intervention. So that's when they get desperate. They start lecturing. They start, writing letters. They start telling the addict how bad their behavior is and how they've affected them so negatively and how they're in pain and how all the things. But at that point, the addictive behavior is so far gone that the addict can't hear sort of their logical complaints. It's like, yes, I've hurt you. I need to go and get my drugs, or I need to go and gamble. I need to go to the slot machines. Like, I need this thing that is keeping me alive right now. You're not keeping me alive. This thing is keeping me alive. And I remember I read a story of a gentleman. He was addicted to alcohol, and his family, it was his wife and two young children, and his wife gave him an ultimatum, which is very common in families where there's addiction. His wife said, well, you need to either choose the booze or us, as me and your two young children. And he was like, easy choice, I'm going to the bar, right? Because you're not helping me to survive at this point. The substance is, and that's part of the black hole of the mind when it comes to addiction, because it's not a logical choice to pick the thing that's destroying you. the mindset is this thing is actually keeping me alive right now. And so that's just a sort of a way to understand. It's really difficult to get. It's really, I know for me, it took me a long time to sort of process and walk with people and journey with people and talk with people to really understand what was going on, like in the mind. Because I'm like, I don't get it. Like, how come, and not in an accusatory way, or like a blaming way, but in a genuine, like curious, like, I want to understand this kind of way. And I know I'll never understand on that level. But just even deepening my understanding was like a strong desire of mine, over the years and at the time, and even now. Addiction is like dominoes. It knocks down the person who then knocks down everyone, including himself. This is a quote from a young boy. He was about 8 years old, and they asked him, like, how do you understand addiction? He said, addiction is like dominoes. It knocks down the person who then knocks down everyone. And he was talking about how addiction affected and impacted his family. And living with addiction, living in an addiction home, or an addictive marriage or an addictive friendship or whatever the case is, it can present like just this feeling of being blindsided. This, like, you're knocked over, like you don't know what to do. I remember when I was married and experienced addiction through my husband. At the time, I was so confused, and really did feel like I couldn't find my footing. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live this life. I don't get this. And I was affected, very, very negatively, like anxious, worried, frightened, like what's going on out there? What's going to happen next? How is he going to react today? Like, I tell a joke today, you laugh. I tell a joke tomorrow and you like fly off the handle, right? It's like, what do you do with that? And it's really difficult to navigate that space. So addiction, again, it affects everybody. There is a cycle of addiction, and it's here. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. But each stage or step is broken down into stages and steps. So like drug use and abuse is also broken down into what the usage looks like, right? So we go from no use to experimental use to social use to regular daily use to harmful use to dependent use, right? So I want you to sort of understand what happens with addiction, just an overview. So we go from drug use and abuse to tolerance to dependence. So we gain greater ability to tolerate. It takes more of the thing or the behavior to get the same amount of reaction or response or feeling of high. And this is a harsh example, but for those who are addicted to fantasy, pornography, things like that, sometimes it goes into like violence and snuff porn because or different kinds of deviant forms, different kinds of deviant porn, because they need greater stimulus in order to achieve the same kind of high or the same kind of effect or impact in the body. Because our bodies are naturally prone towards adjusting or adaptation. And so if you put us in an environment, if we have to go out and live in the cold, like eventually we'll adapt to the cold. There are people who are Eskimos who live, in cold temperatures. I like hot temperatures. I like the beach. And so it would be difficult, but it wouldn't be impossible because we're naturally designed to tolerate and to adapt and to adjust to our environments, right? Because we're intelligent beings. So even when we're adding a substance or a behavior that's destructive, we will become more tolerant and more dependent and more able to what's the word? Yeah, to tolerate more over time. So tolerance and dependence is part of the cycle. Addiction, again, we're looking at chronic, compulsive, we're looking at repeated behavior, habit forming. We're looking at a pathological relationship between the thing, the behavior or the substance, and your functioning, and the ability to be normal or to feel normal. So very specific. And then contemplating treatment is part of the cycle, right? And so sometimes we have a flash of clarity and we're like, oh, whoa, okay, maybe I need to stop this. And that's sort of an ambivalent stage. Stage 5, completing addiction treatment. Stage 6 is relapse. And so addiction, just because we relapse, it doesn't mean that treatment didn't work or whatever the case is. It's part of the cycle. And I think it's 7 times on average an individual has to go through treatment or rehab or recovery in order for them to be fully free of the addiction or the addictive, or let's say escape the addictive cycle. Because if you have ever been addicted to something, you will be in recovery for the rest of your life. You will constantly have to attend to that addictive behavior and make sure that you're not falling back into the cycle, right? And this is why people who have been sober from alcohol or drugs for 10 years still go to their AA meetings. They still go to their NA meetings. They still attend because they value their sobriety. But 2, they're very intentional about their recovery because recovery is ongoing, right? So just wanted to give you an overview of the addictive cycle. I'll give you a few stats as we wind down here for today. Oh, this is wild. 6% of divorces cite substance use as a motivating factor for their divorce. 6 million people are in a marriage where one spouse is battling addiction. These are Canadian statistics, guys. Stats Can, 21% of Canadians are affected by addiction. It crosses lines of gender, orientation, politics, education, SES, socioeconomic status, religion, and ethnicity. 21% of Canadians. Wow. Like that's almost a quarter. Female addicts are 54% more likely to die prematurely because of drug use than male addicts. And tobacco is the leading cause of premature death in Canada. I did not know that. I was very surprised by that, and I thought I would share it. So most addicts will seek help for addiction, or will seek help for the addiction that they have the least shame about. So a lot of these statistics are likely higher than the reality, because people will go, you know, if I don't know, someone's experiencing alcoholism, right? But they're also experiencing sex addiction, and they also do cocaine or whatever. Like if maybe their family members find out about the alcoholism, they might go to AA and they might do that recovery, but they may not share, you know, some of the deeper layers. So a lot of people who are addicted to substances especially have like layers of addictions, have multiple addictions, right? They have like addictive sort of personalities. And so it's important for us to recognize that and to be gracious, but to be wise, especially when we're supporting someone with addiction. So like someone who has a food addiction likely has other addictions. You know, they might also be addicted to throwing up. You never know, right? So just being wise that there are layers, and being gracious as well and compassionate as we share our care and our concern. But also as we are firm and we set appropriate boundaries for our own personal safety. And this is where Al-Anon or Gam-Anon and all these other support groups come into play, because those are designed specifically for us, the loved ones of those who are experiencing addiction. So 12-step programs are by far the most effective ways of dealing with addictions. Therapy can help, yes, but because talk therapy is about talking and is about logic, it doesn't affect or impact like the trauma centers, our feelings brain, our base brain, things like that. So the 12-step programs combat addiction from the 2 most important places. So community, so having people on your side, and talking. So sharing or admitting, confessing, saying out loud the things that you've been in denial about, that you've been pretending don't exist, that you've been hiding, lying about, those kinds of things. So truth and community are the 2 most effective ways to combat addiction, and support groups or 12-step programs facilitate that. So there are lots of 12-step programs. There are 12-step programs for everything, guys, for everything, literally for everything. These are just a few of them that I listed. So there's Gamblers Anonymous, there's Overeaters, there's Debtors Anonymous for the overspenders among us. There's Narcotics Anonymous. There's food, there's overeating. There's what else do we have here? I did Narcotics, Love and Sex Addicts Anonymous, right? So, or Love Addicts Anonymous. There are a lot of groups. If you or anyone that you know are experiencing addictive behavior and it's impacting and affecting your relationship or your family, please reach out. There are resources available. And get the help and support that you can. There are also low stakes ways of combating addiction within family. I love to read. I love books. And so I'm always looking at books and programs that help because they're easily accessible. Sorry. Unspoken Legacy is a great book. Again, the connection of trauma and addiction. The Porn Trap, really great book. Out of the Shadows, kind of triggering, but again, a good book. Clean, Overcoming Addiction and Ending America's Greatest Tragedy. That's a good one. Adult Children of Alcoholics, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And I haven't read any. So I think it was Lifa that noted cell phone addiction or social media. If you guys have resources on that that you've read and that you'd like to share with me, I would be super open to that, because I've actually not done a lot of research on like social media addiction or like cell phone addiction. So if you guys have resources that you want to share, that would be great. Yes. Oh, I appreciate you. All right, we're going to close up here in the next 2 minutes because I want to honor your time. But again, focusing on these areas focusing on these areas and taking the steps towards our own self-reflection, introspection, and being in communities like these will help us to develop revolutionary relationships. So I want to encourage us to continue to do that. Every week I give you guys the personal challenge. It is the same. What is one thing that you guys are going to act on this week? Apply, change, and teach. Let me know in the chat if you'd like. And thank you guys, by the way. A lot of you guys send me messages afterwards to my WhatsApp and so on. I appreciate it. I appreciate your suggestions. I appreciate your feedback. And I appreciate your encouragement. So thank you guys so much for your support and for all of that and for doing the work. I see you guys out here doing the work. I see you guys challenging yourselves. I see you guys making changes and making moves and getting the results. So thank you guys for sharing your success stories and your celebrations with me as well. The Mentiverse app, I do have to update that. YouTube channel will be up shortly where you guys can get the replays. It'll all be there. Next week, we're looking at family conflict. And so again, we're in our family series. When it comes to the relationship series, we'll continue our transformational conversations. Conflict is normal. I just want to say that right off the bat. It's how we deal with and address conflict that really matters. And so we're going to be talking about how to deal with conflict well, next week. And when there are other humans in our space, there's going to be some kind of conflict. We are not the same. Okay. But that's okay. Conflict is good. It's exciting. It's energy. It's all that stuff. And it's how we get to learn one another even better and even more deeply. And so maybe I'll give you a tip. Acceptance is a really big deal when it comes to conflict. But yes, we'll talk about that next week. Excited for you guys to join in. And we may have a special guest next week to talk with us about family conflict. And if you guys have questions, I'll stay on for a couple of more minutes, but I'm going to close right now. And I'm also going to stop the recording so that my special announcement is not recorded. Thank you guys so much for being on the relationship series. I'm going to give you a special announcement in just a moment.